Previously on The Reef, Gabriel and Tong arrived at the reef ready to steal another bounty hunter's prize. Delivering that prize will put them in front of Oeming Valenti, the baddest man on the reef. And as Kayal North flees break my back for greener pastures, he's about to make a new friend. One that would happily kill him just as soon as help him. Find out who gets shivved next on The Reef. Episode number 6. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Reef, written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace. Narrated by Scott Sigler. Hello, junkies! This episode of The Reef is brought to you by our Audible free trial offer at scottsigler.com/audible. Sign up for a no-risk 30-day trial and get a free audiobook, including this one, The Reef, so you can slam it straight into your veins with no waiting. Or you can get my best-selling sci-fi thriller, Earthcore, also for free, or just about any damn book in the world by any damn author. If it turns out you don't like Audible, cancel, pay nothing, and keep the audiobook forever and ever. Amen. That is scottsigler.com/audible. After this episode, I will tell you about my marathon writing month. May has been monstrous as I close in on the first draft of a brand new horror novel. But for now, let's get rolling with The Reef, episode number 6. Chapter 8. The Contract. Oeming Valenti was a gangster, yes. He knew that. There were a lot of gangsters on the reef. Oeming was, at times, a butcher. Sure. When it came to life-takers on the reef, though, he was far from alone. Being a gangster and, occasionally, a butcher hadn't risen him to his level of stature and break my back. No, if that was all that was required, he knew of at least 100 sentients who could have done what he'd done. The difference between him and those fools? Valenti was a businessman. His true talent lay in negotiation. He possessed no moral or ethical code. He was plagued by absolutely no conscience when it came to getting what he wanted. Being able to make a deal, by carrot or by stick, was the reason he sat on top of the heap. He'd arrived on the reef only 6 years earlier, and break my back just 5. The last of the Flathead gang had still been running things then. Craith, Diggums, and Big Boy Paul had inherited the harvest sowed by their grandfathers, who had butchered 50-odd key and who knew how many humans. Craith, Diggums, and Big Boy Paul had every business in town paying them exorbitant prices for protection, with percentages atop that in the most profitable enterprises. The Flatheads employed the most dangerous cutthroats in a town where cutthroats were the majority of the populace. What the 3 Flathead bosses did not have, though, was a clue how to manage, maintain, or even hold on to a significant portion of their wealth. Oeming was first employed by them as a bookkeeper. It would have been the easiest task in the universe to rob the Flatheads blind, disappear with enough money to buy a small luxury yacht of his own, and spend his days sailing the galaxy. Thing was, money bored him. Even when he had little of it, he knew that accumulating wealth was a menial, even trivial task for a man of his talents. Talents that included manipulation. As a high-level bookkeeper, it had been easier than one would think to move a few numbers from column A to column B, from B to A, then let someone else make the connection that Big Boy Paul was embezzling from Diggums, and Diggums was outright stealing from Big Boy Paul. When the two had it out on Main Street and they both died, along with about a dozen other Flatheads, well, that was far better than Valenti had ever expected. The final warlord, the obese and sadistic Craith, was far smarter than his 2 deceased pals. Valenti couldn't find a way to trick the man. Fortunately, Craith had one redeeming quality, a quality Valenti was able to use against him. For all of Craith's violence and sadism, he was oddly trusting in his bookkeeper. It took another year. During that year, Oeming secretly hired a crew to go into the bare expanse and install a deep anchor screw into the solid slate. Oeming himself took secret trips out to the screw, every 10 days, to tie up one live animal or another. All that work to develop a reproducible pattern. A specific time of the month when a Rama beast would come to feed on whatever happened to be tied to that spot. At the end, Oeming combined his preparation and the natural tendency toward greed. Kraith's own soldiers fell upon him, took him out to the anchor and chained him there. Oeming and Kraith's soldiers, now Oeming soldiers, watched the Rama beast tear Kraith to shreds. That moment served two purposes. First, no more Kraith. Oeming took over the outfit. Second, everyone in the gang formerly known as the Flatheads knew what would happen to them if they crossed him. Kraith was the first sentient chained to that spot. He wasn't the last. Kraith's date with Dottie, Oeming loved that name and thought it very appropriate, meant Oeming owned the town. He had wiped out the Flathead hierarchy without ever picking up a single weapon. He valued violent sentience as well, and violent sentience with skill at violence most of all. Oeming treated such sentience with the proper accord. Which was the reason he was sitting at his stone slab of a desk, talking to the two men sitting opposite in plush guest chairs. "Mr. Gabriel and Mr. Tong," Oeming said. "I've heard of you. You've worked mostly over in Kick My Nuts, correct?" The tall man nodded. The one holding the brass sippy cup said nothing. "Just call me Gabriel. No Mr. required. But Mr. Tong here, he does love his honorific." Tong took a sip from his drink. "Gabriel," Oeming said, "I do appreciate you returning April to our care. However, I awarded that contract, long distance, to a Mr. Church and a Mr. Belvedere. They messaged me 2 weeks ago to tell me they were bringing April home. How is it that you came to be in possession of her?" Gabriel shrugged. "Word got out that she needed to be retrieved, so we retrieved her." The man had confidence, swagger, and smarts you could tell by just talking to him. "I see," Oeming said. "And you didn't run into Mr. Church and Mr. Belvedere when you retrieved April?" Gabriel turned to Tong. "Do you remember meeting a Mr. Church and a Mr. Belvedere?" Tong thought for a moment, shook his head, then took another sip. "There you have it," Gabriel said. "No recollection of meeting anyone by that name." Oeming leaned forward on the desk. "Gabriel, let's assume that you did away with Mr. Church and Mr. Belvedere and took possession of my property. Let's assume you asked around as to who might want a girl of her looks returned to her benefactors, and let's assume your questions turned up my name. May we assume that?" Gabriel nodded. "Our questions did turn up your name." "And what if Mr. Church and Mr. Belvedere had been my employees instead of my contractors? What if you had killed my men and walked right in here to meet me?" Gabriel's face wrinkled. "Killed them? I've already established we don't even know them, Mr. Valenti. I find hypotheticals to be a waste of time. Were those men your employees or not?" "They were not," Oeming said. "But you didn't know that." Gabriel smiled. "I guess this is our lucky day then. I believe there was a fee associated with the return of Miss April. She has been returned. Therefore, that fee will be paid to us." A statement, not a question. "As for Mr. Church and Mr. Belvedere, Gabriel, will I be seeing those men again? Alive, I mean." Gabriel let out a heavy, thoughtful sigh. "Well, having never met them, I couldn't say for sure. But from the sound of it, men like that have a way of disappearing. Were I a betting man, I wouldn't bet on seeing them again." Oeming didn't care who brought the girl back as long as she was back. She was already on her way to the cottages on East Main Street, and this time she would be chained. She would not run away again. Oeming pressed a spot on his desktop. "Sally, bring the credit sheet, please." The door opened. The aptly named Wide Sally came in. Sally was Oeming's first lieutenant, the person in his organization he simultaneously trusted more than any other and distrusted more than any other. She was, after all, potentially capable of hiring a few soldiers to take him out to the old anchor for a date with Dottie. Gabriel paid Sally little attention, but Mr. Tong watched her carefully. Sally handed Oeming the credit chit meant for church and Belvedere, then left the room. Oeming tossed the chit to Gabriel. "There you are." Gabriel pocketed the chit, then reached down and patted the round case beside his chair. "Now, let's talk about this," he said. Gabriel had come to the War Lodge with 2 items of interest: April and the case. He'd claimed the bounty on April. He wanted the bounty on whatever was in that case, but Oeming didn't care about that. "I already told you, Gabriel. The hurrah is of no interest to me." Gabriel stared down at the case. "It was a long trip," he said. "We need to get paid for it. Not just for the girl. Craith put out a contract on this hurrah. We tracked it down, brought it back, and here we are." Oeming smiled. "Mr. Craith, rest his poor soul, hasn't been with us for years now." "It took years to find this one," Gabriel said. He finally looked away from the case, looked Oeming right in the eyes. Any pretense or humor had left him. "Flatheads put out the contract. Craith ran the Flatheads. Now you run the Flatheads. We fulfilled the contract." The man leaned forward in his chair. "Someone has to pay," Gabriel said. "Someone always has to pay." Oeming saw something flop inside the opaque case, disturbing the fog. The Flatheads didn't exist anymore. Oeming was in his rights to send these 2 packing. He just wished he knew what the contract had been for in the first place. "Exactly what affront did your winged friend in the large gas-filled hat box there commit against my predecessor?" "He's a thief," Gabriel said, "and occasional assassin. Sneaky little thing. I'm guessing he either stole something from Craith or killed someone Craith gave a squirt about. I don't know. I don't care. Someone's got to pay." Oeming's temper rose. Say something once, all right. You're making a point. Say something twice, and you are lecturing. Oeming didn't like people lecturing him. "Gabriel, I welcomed you and Mr. Tong into my office. I'm paying you the courtesy of hearing you out. Perhaps you should match that respect with respect of your own." Gabriel sat back. "Meaning?" Tong surprised them both by answering first. "He means your tone," the big man said. "It sucks. Have a drink, Gabe. Relax." Tong offered Gabriel the brass sippy cup. Gabriel stared at it, then at Tong, then at Valenti, then at the mug again. "Yes, well," Gabriel said, then took a long drink. He made a face like he just swallowed goat piss. "Smooth, right?" Tong said. "As a baby's ass," Gabriel said. He cleared his throat. "Asking your forgiveness, Mr. Valenti. The money for the girl is fine, but the contract on our winged friend here was worth 20 times as much. Hearing we won't get paid that money has made me a tad upset, to the point where I fear I have come across as rude." Gabriel offered the sippy cup to Oeming. "Want some?" Oeming had no desire to consume whatever was in that container, but the offer mollified him some, calmed his temper. Of course Gabriel would be upset. Who wouldn't be? A 6-week round trip, not even counting how long they'd hunted this hurrah, for nothing? Although, men like these could come in handy. Perhaps a negotiation was in order. "Mr. Gabriel, Mr. Tong, the man who posted that contract no longer exists, and he left no records of an account due. I'm a businessman. Since we don't know exactly what this hurrah did, I can't in good conscience pay you anything at all." Gabriel took another drink. "That is a disappointment," he said. "I can imagine," Oeming said. "I suspect that disappointment is a constant risk in your line of work." "It is." Gabriel handed the sippy cup back to Tong. Tong grunted, held the cup like a boy holds a sleeping puppy. "You gentlemen seem to be the competent sort," Oeming said. "Will you be able to make up the loss of your time and skills for this contract?" "I suppose we'll have to," Gabriel said. "Just out of curiosity." Oeming again looked at the gas-filled chamber. "In the absence of a bounty, what will you do with your little friend?" Gabriel shrugged. "Tong likes his food to have a little kick to it." Oeming felt a tiny thrill spark in his soul. There were many violent people. Those who would eat another sentient, Key and Sklono excluded, of course, were a rare breed indeed. Men like this terrified even the most hardcore gangster. "Sounds delicious," Oeming said. "However, may I offer an alternative recommendation?" Gabriel nodded. "There's a thriving slave market in the town of Pardon My Foot," Oeming said. "It's a mere 4 days' journey due east." Gabriel glanced at Tong. "We been to Pardon My Foot?" Tong grunted. He took a sip while holding up 2 fingers. "Huh," Gabriel said. "Looks like we've been there twice. I suppose a 3rd visit couldn't hurt. What's the market price for hurrah these days?" "It depends on their skill set," Oeming said. "They're a shockingly useful species in my experience." Gabriel nodded. "It's a start, I suppose." He cocked his head, suddenly studying Valenti closely. "You know, Mr. Valenti, you are far more helpful than a man in your position generally is." Oeming smiled. "Professional courtesy costs nothing and often pays dividends," he said. "It's a lesson many in positions like mine never seem to learn. Listen, you boys seem all right. I'd like to offer you free room and board while you're in Break My Back, and box seats at our next triumph." Tong made a noise. It might have been an unintelligible word, but if so, only Gabriel seemed to understand. "Right," he said to Tong. Then, to Valenti, "That's very generous. We'll take you up on it. Just one thing." Valenti waited. "Drinks," Gabriel said. "Tong's thermos there is almost empty." "Drinks will be on the house," Oeming said. "Your line of credit at the bar will be without limit." "Thank you," Gabriel said. He and Tong were rising from their plush seats when the door to Valenti's office opened again. Valenti watched Gabriel and Tong instantly shift their position, coil like snakes, ready to strike. But it wasn't a threat. It was Wide Sally. She slipped into the office, not waiting for permission, moving with a trademark grace that seemed so alien on her big frame. She came around the desk, whispered in Oeming's ear. "Renard's gone," she said. "Someone kicked the shit out of him last night. I think he left because he was afraid of what you do to him for getting beat up outside of the Triumph." Oeming thought on that for a moment, quickly decided that Renard had probably made a wise choice. Renard's rash but wise decision somehow kept Oeming's temper in check. Renard would still have to be found, of course, and dealt with, but still, Oeming did admire intelligence. "Who did it?" "One witness," Wide Sally said. "Reported a big guy, walked with a limp. I asked around. That matches the description of Lash Kari." The name sounded familiar. "The troublemaker?" Valenti's fingers drummed the desktop. "The one who tore up the hole the other day?" Wide Sally nodded. "That's the one." "And I assume you have Mr. Kari chained to the feasting room table." "Word is he left town," Sally said. "I've got the crew out looking for him in case he hasn't, but so far, nothing." Valenti thought for a moment. A short moment. He waved Wide Sally away. She slipped out of the office without a sound. Valenti turned his attention back to his 2 guests. "Gentlemen, you've spent a lot of time on the reef?" Gabriel nodded. "Good," Oeming said. "Are you skilled at tracking?" "I suck at it." Gabriel jerked his thumb toward Tong. "But this man, he is the best there is." Tong grunted. Oeming smiled. "Then I may have found a way for you to make up for your losses. Find someone. When you do, I need you to retrieve his head for me. Chapter 9. The Chase. He was a week out from Break My Back when he first spotted the riders tracking him. Domes had artificial grav, the standard amount for human and quith. Outside of domes, however, the reef's lighter grav took some getting used to. Kayal had hitched a ride with a caravan that was setting off from town the morning he left Dahlia's cottage. Soon, they were traversing the open reef. In these parts, the vast landscape looked very much like multicolored grasslands. Purple branch, orange branch, sage branch, and a few other varieties grew wild, unchecked by the daily maintenance of Break My Back's citizens. Roads and paths snaked through the branches, which weren't plants at all, as far as Kai knew, but rather some kind of colonial organism, closer in concept to coral than vegetation. The branches grew in patches of color. Like everything else on the reef, every day was a fight for life. He'd heard each color was its own species, constantly trying to choke out the differing colors around it. And all species of branch had to compete against shimmer scale, which poisoned the branch growths around it, leaving glistening bare patches of endless broken black slate. As if that wasn't enough, the branches were the primary food of several animals: grinders, crawlers, longworms, krelmont, and more. Yellow and purple pepper deers flew overhead now and then, bloated bags of gas that jetted to and fro, hunting for grails. Tall white orbs rose up from the branch, phallic curves reflecting sunlight. To get as tall as a man, Kai had heard, white orb had to be at least a century old. During the sunlight hours, you could almost let your eyes fool you into believing this was a place lush with life and not an infinite corpse crawling with various forms of space maggots. When the reef rotated, though, and you found yourself on the dark side, all that changed. At night, the colorful parts of branch retreated into stubby black tubes. Fang fleas burrowed for safety. Crawlers wedged themselves between rocks. Krelmont packed together in spiky armored piles. Longworms did whatever the hell longworms did to disappear. At night, a whole different set of animals came out to feed. That included Rama beasts. A few hours out of Break My Back, the broken road led through the branchlands and into the Parkana Desert. Kai had been in deserts that were made of sand. No sand here, just vast plains of broken purple and black slate. He didn't know why branch grew in some places and not others. He didn't really care. Kayal tagged along with the caravan as far as the bubble trading post that sat at a fork in the road. One fork led to the town of Burn Your Face, the other to Kick My Nuts. He decided to purchase a new EVA suit and a fresh mount at the post. Thank you, Renard. Then ride solo the rest of the way to Kick My Nuts. Krelmonts were temperamental, sure, but they were ideal riding beasts for the reef. They weren't as fast as spider bears, but since Krelmonts were indigenous to the reef, they didn't need breathing gear. Kai thought a Krelmont looked like the angry love child of a rhino and a spiked mace. A good animal to ride, as long as you were very, very careful about where you sat. He was only an hour or two out from the trading post when he spotted the pair of riders. Just like him, they must have mounted up at the trading post. They hung back, far back, but Kayal noticed quickly they always kept the exact same distance between them and him. That was no coincidence. He gave them a few nights to try something, making camp and waiting for an attack to come. It didn't, but neither did they leave his tail. 3 days out from the trading post, he had the opportunity to do something about it. Kai didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in luck. He'd been hired as a guard on this very road once before, in the first few months after his arrival on the reef, when the money Doc Patah had given him had run out. During that job, he and his party had come across a shuttle that crashed maybe 20 meters from the road. Hard to tell how long the wreck had been there. Things didn't age much on the reef. The wreckage was spread far and wide. A big chunk of main hull stuck up like a warped monument, and just past that monument, a side road led off into the flats. When he came to that wreck, he turned onto the side road. Road was more than a generous term for the now mostly overgrown ribbon leading off through the branch. He remembered traveling that same road with the crew of prospectors who had hired him as a bodyguard. The road led to the place where the miners had decided to turn back. The miners that were still alive, anyway. The path led to a place called the Plain of False Dunes. Gabriel and Tong were planning to close in and make their move that evening. They were in no rush. Valenti, in addition to offering them a handsome bounty on one lash kari, was also paying their travel and capture expenses. The longer the pair stayed out, the more they could get from the rich mob boss upon their return. And, of course, Valenti had no idea where they were. Track Kari, take him out, then off to Pardon My Foot to dump the flapping bit of annoyance in the case mounted behind Gabriel, and then return to Break My Back to collect the bounty on Kari. And the per diem. Per diems, thank you very much. The trading post manager had received a message from Valenti. When Gabriel and Tong arrived, new EVA suits were paid for and waiting for them, along with a pair of healthy Krellmonts, spike tents that were necessary for protection against any Rama that might be stalking the night, and an assortment of necessary equipment. Air processors, infrared scopes, food, and a pair of high-powered, big-bore compressed air rifles. The rifles were meant for defense against Ramas. They were not to be used on Kari. For that, Valenti specifically requested an up-close and personal encounter. Spitters, knives, clubs, brass knuckles, even shale shards were fine, but Valenti didn't want the man dead with a single shot. Valenti wanted that big bastard Kari to suffer a long, slow, painful beating. Gabriel and Tong were just the guys to deliver. So they hung back for 2 days, racking up per diem, watching and learning what they could from a distance. On the third day, they saw the old shuttle wreck. Just past it, Kari left the main road. It looked like he was wandering off into scrubby branch land. When they reached the point where he left the road, however, they saw the mostly obscured path Kari had taken. "Maybe he knows we're following him," Gabriel said. Tong nodded. "Probably." "But this trail's barely used. If he knows we're tracking him, wouldn't he know this makes it easier for us to do so?" Tong nodded. "Probably." Gabriel's partner was good at many things. Eloquence and a gift for description weren't among them. Maybe Kari had spotted them, hoped he could lose them by getting off the main road. Maybe he had a hidey hole out there somewhere. Or maybe he was trying to lure them into a trap. Well, this certainly wasn't as boring as Gabriel had thought it would be. He was starting to enjoy this hunt. There was so much broken branch that, initially, Gabriel could have followed Lash's trail without any help from Tong. As the reef started to rotate into darkness, the branch thinned, then vanished into shimmer scale. "Whole lot of nothing out here," Gabriel said. Tong didn't answer. He didn't even grunt. The path became indiscernible, then vanished altogether, at least as far as Gabriel could see. Nothing but shale clinking and clacking in time with the Krellmont steps. Tong kept on, as if they were traveling a highway with clearly marked lines. It was about an hour later that Tong spoke a single syllable. "Dunes." In the distance, Gabriel saw them. Dunes, a phenomenon on the reef, not common but not unheard of. The product of bacteria farts, he'd been told. Bacteria that lived deep below even the loose slate in the honeycombed region that surrounded the super-dense core. Trillions and trillions of bacteria, eating away at the slate, their waste gas combining, rising up like an ill wind. In most places, this gas simply seeped out. In a few places, something happened that made the surface taut, like a crystalline drum skin, rather than loose, like slate. The gas built up beneath these skins, making it rise until it hit a pressure high enough to force open little splits or seams. The high-pressure gas shot out, the seam closed, the skin lowered back down, and the process started all over again. Looking at the big dune field was like looking at a slowly boiling black desert. Their quarry had left the main road and chosen to follow a path less traveled. And that, as it turned out, made all the difference. "He knew this was here," Gabriel said. "You think?" "Probably," Tong said. Tong pointed. Gabriel looked. There was Kari, off in the distance, still on his spiked Krelmont, winding between the dunes that rose, some as high as 10 meters, before falling back down again. "I think 3 days per diem is enough," Gabriel said. "Let's get him." Tong led the way. Darkness consumed the dunes. Overhead, stars burned bright. The void seemed to expand forever. Like the old prospector song went, "There be blackness below and blackness above." The two bounty hunters rode through the dunes. Stepping on a dune would cause you to plummet through, but Krelmont were smart enough not to step on them, so the ride was safe. Gabriel and Tong steadily closed in. Sometimes they lost sight of Kari and his Krelmont behind a rising dune, but they always regained line of sight on him. Until the dune shifted again, came down, and Kari was gone. Tong pointed. He'd spotted Kari's Krelmont several meters ahead of them. Its saddle was empty. The rising dune to Gabriel's right seemed to shatter like an elephant-sized Christmas ornament. Lash Kari burst forth from the thin black material. Gabriel almost had time to react before a big fist smacked into his clear visor, sending him into a backward somersault off his mount. Once Kai had lured his pursuers into the plain of false dunes, he simply waited for the right swells to appear. Most people saw the sudden appearance and disappearance of the dunes as completely random, but there were stable patterns to the movements of the gassy mounds. You just had to be patient and attentive. As he rode, he kept checking back to see if his pursuers were savvy enough to pop dunes. They weren't. Kai wasn't surprised, as not many people knew you could dig your way under them. The chasms beneath most dunes were so deep that if you fell through the thin skin, your body was irrecoverable. But that didn't mean you couldn't dig under the edge of one, come out on the side of a chasm, and cling to it just like any mountain climber. When Kai saw the right combination of rise and fall, saw how he could dismount and work his way back, staying completely concealed behind the dunes, he put his plan to work. It was easy to see where his pursuers would go. They were following his trail, after all. He waited beneath the black skin, marveling at the beauty of translucent, flexible glass rising up above him, a swelling dome that made a sound like pieces of stiff foam grinding together. Through that sheen, he saw his trackers. Kai let the first one pass, then clambered up, gathered himself, and dove through the dune. The flexible surface shattered like a frozen balloon. Before the pieces even started to fall, he rushed the second Krelmont. Kai hit the rider with an overhand right, not hard enough to break the EVA suit's visor, but still pretty damn hard. The rider tumbled off his mount, hands flailing for balance and knocking free the round case tied down behind him. The rider landed hard. The case landed harder, breaking a seal. Pink gas seeped out. Kai caught a flashing image of a leathery wing. Kai drew his blade and stabbed the Krelmont in the ass. The beast lurched, so hard the knife twisted out of Kai's grip. The Krelmont took off like a shot, hooked hooves kicking up trailing arcs of broken slate, blades still stuck in his rump. The lead rider, by far the bigger of the two, jerked his mount around and rushed Kai. Kai sidestepped, started to reach up toward the rider, but the Krelmont spikes made Kai flinch away at the last instant. As the beast rode by, a hand like an industrial bear trap closed on a patch of Kai's suit. That rider had made a mistake. If you grab a fighter, that fighter knows where your hand is, thereby knows where your arm is, and thereby knows where your head is. Kai threw a blind roundhouse, felt the fist land a glancing blow. That rider fell away, ripping a handful of Kai's EVA suit as he did. The second Krelmont stood there, frightened and confused. Kai wheel-kicked it in the face. The beast sprinted away even faster than the first one had. A flashing of starlight on metal, a flapping sound deadened by the reef's pitiful excuse for an atmosphere. Kai turned to see the first man, long blade in hand, beset upon by a small, flapping hurrah, a seriously pissed-off hurrah. The man had been coming to stab Kai in the back. The hurrah's undulating wing slapped the blade from the man's hand. Kai rushed the man, but the man snatched up his blade. The lethal metal point made Kai pull up short. The man kept his blade pointed at Kai as he ran to the lead rider, helped him up. There was a brief standoff. Two humans staring down Kai and the hurrah. The two trackers seemed to suddenly realize their mounts were fleeing across the dunes. They had to know Kai was dangerous, but being this far out on the reef without a mount, that was a far bigger threat. The two men took off after their galloping Krellmounts. Kai would have rather put both men down for good, but other than that, his plan had worked to perfection.
"Your suit is trashed,"
the hurrah said. The voice, as quiet as it was out here, came from a small metal box strapped to the hurrah's back. Kai looked at his shoulder. Maybe not such a perfect plan after all. A fist-sized patch missing. Air leaking out. Kai dug into a thigh pocket for the patching kit. "You don't have a suit on," he said to the hurrah, then stumbled, suddenly dizzy.
"Know much about my race, pal? We survive in places way worse than this. Here, let me help you with that."
The floating sentient flew to Kai. Mouth flaps pulled the patching kit from Kai's hand. Kai felt an urge to sit down before his legs quit on him, so he sat. He might have even blacked out, he wasn't sure. When the reef and the stars above stopped spinning around him, he blinked a few times, took a deep breath. "That's better," he said. The hurrah had saved his life. Kai glanced around for his Krellmont. It was sitting calmly a few 100 meters away. Why hadn't the attackers taken that one? Maybe they had weapons or personal effects on their own mounts that they couldn't bear to let go.
"I could use some help,"
the hurrah said.
"Can you get me someplace so I can get off of this rock?"
"Probably. But right now I'm getting the hell away from this area. Then I'm camping for the night, before the Ramas come out. You're welcome to join me."
"What's a Rama?"
"If you don't know, I suggest you take me up on my offer. You coming with me or not?" The hurrah thought about this. It didn't think long.
"What's your name?"
Kai stood. "Lash Kari. And yours?"
"Goalie,"
the hurrah said.
"And since I have no desire to find out what a Rama is, or what they like to eat, I'm definitely coming with you."
Kai pitched his spike tent behind a large cropping of rocks that were probably billion-year-old hemorrhoids. He sat cross-legged inside the tent, ate dried, tasteless food bars. He offered one to his newfound hurrah companion, who declined. The hurrah was shaking badly. Kayal wondered if that species could suffer from post-traumatic stress. "How long were you in that box?" The hurrah's synthesized voice came out jittery.
"I lost count months ago."
For all of Kai's violent past, he'd never spent time in jail until he'd set foot on the reef. And even then, the longest he'd been locked up was 5 days. By the 5th day, he'd been ready to kill, or, worse, beg forgiveness, to get out. He couldn't imagine being locked in a cell barely bigger than his body, and for months, Kayal North felt something he didn't feel very often. Pity. "That's rough," he said. "Why were those punks carting you around in a drum case?" The hurrah started to talk, but a severe shiver rippled across his bony frame. Having been raised in the purest nation, Kai didn't have much of an affinity for science, nor any real desire to catch up on that discipline. But when you traverse the galaxy, you can't help but notice a few oddities. One phrase he'd heard in his travels was convergent evolution, when two completely different species wind up having similar attributes. Or something like that, anyway. Hurrah had evolved on another planet entirely, but they looked so much like manta rays from Earth, it kind of freaked Kai out a little. "I can turn up the heat if you like," Kai said.
"It's not the temperature."
Kai nodded, waited.
"They locked me up because they're bounty hunters, and I'm an intergalactically known assassin. They think I killed a human man related to someone on the reef."
Kai nodded again, as if that answer made all the sense in the world. Ghoulie, wings, central body, sensory pits, mouth flaps and all, was no bigger than Kai's chest. Hard to imagine something that size being an intergalactically known assassin. "Well, did you kill him?"
"Mistaken identity,"
the hurrah said instantly.
"and also self-defense. I wasn't even there. Listen, you better not try anything. They're carting me around because they couldn't get the bounty for me. So if you think you can, you're just wasting your time.
Not a threat, per se, but definitely a promise that Ghoulie would fight back if attacked. I could give a damn about what you did or didn't do, Kai said. All I care about is that you're smart enough to not try anything with me. The Hurrah's body shivered in a new way.
That's hysterical,
Ghoulie said.
How dumb would I have to be to take on a giant like you?
Kai wondered if Ghoulie's passivity was only because the Hurrah didn't have any weapons. Sounds like they had you a long time, Kai said. Any of your people out there looking for you? Anyone back home, wherever that is, you need to let know you're still alive? Ghoulie was quiet for a long time.
No one,
the Hurrah said finally.
No one is looking for me. No one who doesn't also want me for reward money, that is. I don't have a home.
It struck Kai, suddenly and with power, how he'd wound up in a tent with a sentient not that different from himself. Had Ghoulie asked Kai that question instead of the other way around, Kai could have given the exact same answer. Kai had a home once. He'd had someone who looked out for him. Marcus Diablo. Marcus had tried to teach him how to have a life, not just be a fighter. Kai hadn't listened. After all, Marcus was old, so what could he possibly have known? This version of Kai was an idiot. His younger self, far more so. If Kai had listened, things might have turned out different. Might have turned out better. But he hadn't, and now he had no one. Just like this little Hurrah. Here's the deal, Ghoulie. At first light, I'm angling back to the main road. It's another 3 days before I reach Kick My Nuts. Stick with me till we get there if you like.
Kick My Nuts a human town?
Quith, Kai said. It's actually called Kiriharik, I think. I heard it's about the only law-abiding town in the Reef. I always used to put that in the negative column, but considering who I pissed off back in, well, where I came from, it seems like a good choice.
Not to me. I'm not a big fan of the law.
You don't have to come. But doesn't seem like you know the Reef, and I'm guessing your two buddies don't really give a damn if it was mistaken identity or not. They'll still be looking for you. Ghoulie stopped shaking for just a moment.
Are there off-world transports in this town?
Kai shrugged. I imagine so. I've never been there, but it's supposed to be a pretty big place. He sat back, let the intergalactically known assassin think it over.
Don't know where else I'd go,
the Hurrah said.
I'll take my chances and ride with you.
That is it for episode number 6 of The Reef. The Reef is a Galactic Football League novella. If you have followed the Galactic Football League series, you might recognize this episode's new character, Ghoulie. That intergalactically wanted criminal was also in a book called The Detective, another GFL novella. The Detective tells the story of Federico Esteban Gasipa Gonzaga, a.k.a. Fred, the private detective who tracks down the whereabouts of the parents of Quentin Barnes, star quarterback of the Ionath Krakens. If you want to check out that GFL novella, please visit scottsigler.com/thedetective. Before the episode, I told you I would tell you about my marathon month of May. First off, the writing I'm doing this month is for the first draft of a brand new horror novel. At the moment, I am not allowed to say the name of this new horror novel. I have to wait until the publisher announces it. That sucks! I know, but when it is done, this book will be one of my greatest accomplishments. I have written 71,000 words on this book in just May alone. That's 284 pages in less than a month, because there's still a week to go in May as I record this. That's madness. I have been working on the book since April 8th of 2019. The first week of this project began with nothing but writing an outline. So as far as actual writing goes, I've been working on it since April 15th. In the 5 weeks I've been working on this first draft, I've written 91,000 first draft words, or 364 pages. Holy crap. Now, a lot of that output comes because I get to write full-time. I'm a very lucky person. I've worked hard to get here. There's also some luck, and I get to write full-time. A lot of this production is because I keep getting better at this job, more efficient, more focused. The more I write, the better I am at writing stuff that's going to stick around to the final draft. So we're able to get better books done faster. But a lot of this is also the outlining process. Taking 1 or 2 weeks to spend just on the outline really helps me write better, faster, with more keeper material at the end of that first draft. Now, a lot of those 91,000 first draft words will be cut or rewritten in the second draft. That's just the nature of the beast. To me, a first draft is what I call getting the clay on the wheel. Second and third drafts are where you shape that clay into something really great. But it does look like I will meet my June 1st first draft deadline, which is awesome. Some writers laugh at deadlines, make jokes about deadlines, blow them off, but not me, because deadlines help keep me on task, writing more cool stuff for all of you cool people. That is it for this week. We will be back next week for episode number 7 of The Reef, and I will talk to you all real soon. You have been listening to The Reef, a Galactic Football League novella. Written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace. Narrated by Scott Sigler. Audiobook directed by A.B. Kovacs and engineered by Steve Rickyburn. Copyright 2019 by Empty Set Entertainment. All rights reserved. Theme music is by the band Amps and Volts.